you, Carmen, and good morning, everyone. I am Janelle Mercado, and I'm the Assistant Director for Supporting Innovative Practices. I have short, straight blonde hair, hazel eyes, and glasses. I'm wearing a light blue SIP t-shirt and sitting in front of a SIP teal blue and white virtual background. I am beyond excited to introduce our keynote presenter this morning. He is Mirko Chardin. Mirko is a former teacher, founding head of school, and a nationally recognized consultant specializing in inclusive teaching and learning and school culture. His work focuses on creating learning environments where all students feel a sense of belonging and purpose, and where educators are equipped to meet the needs of diverse learners through universal design for learning, positive relationship building, and inclusive and culturally responsive instructional practices. Mirko is the co-author of the best-selling book, Equity by Design, The Power and Promise of UDL and Restorative Practices that Heal School Communities. As you listen to today's keynote, we invite you to share your thoughts and submit any questions using the chat feature for the Q&A that will follow his session. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to Mirko Chardin.
Thank you very much. Good morning, good morning, good morning, everyone. As mentioned, I am Mirko Chardin. I am wearing a gray blazer. I am sitting in front of a teal SIP virtual background. I have dark brown dreads and I'm a caramel toned brother, and we are going to get ready to rock and roll. The first thing I actually want us to do is to begin our time together by focusing on joy. And by that, what I mean is I want you to reflect on a memory, a moment of time in your life, in your personal life, or professional life, that when you think about it, it legitimately fills your head and heart with joy. Now, if you have photos on your devices or artifacts that represent those moments, I'm going to ask you to pull them out and look at them, because we're going to spend some time reflecting on those moments. We're going to share about them in the chat box. I'm going to play a song that's going to guide us as we do this. And before we get going, I also want to share that I have a couple of examples on the screen, a couple of images that represent moments that fill me with joy that I want to share with you as we begin centering on joy today. And those moments that you see, they both come from the same event. It was actually an author talk that was held for me in honor of my latest book, Restorative Practices that Heal School Communities. And it was the first time that I was actually able to bring my 1 year and 3-month-old daughter to see Daddy at work. And it was just such a powerful, transformative moment for me. You know, the smiles just coming up on my face as I think about it. And my heart's filled with joy seeing my little kiddo on the screen. And now I'm going to put it right back on you. We're going to hear a little bit of Childish Gambino's Feels Like Summer. And while that plays, light up that chat box with the things that bring you joy. Wow, wow, wow. I love what I'm seeing in the chat. You all are amazing, and you all are being so authentic by speaking your truths right now. And I hope that you all are checking out what colleagues are sharing in the chat, because there's so many things when I look at them, they light me up as well. See, there is something powerful and transformative about human beings being in spaces together and having the opportunity to actually share what's in our heads and hearts, be seen, heard, and hear each other. And there is something dynamic when human beings have the opportunity to share the things that bring us joy. Because despite whatever our perceived differences may be, we find that there's always commonalities in those threads of things that we celebrate and light up our heads and hearts. And for me, this is the work of acknowledging the fact that as educators, our work is always done in and through the human beings. So we always celebrate that human energy to ensure that everyone feels seen, heard, and welcomed. Now, as we plow through and continue moving on our journey together today, I do want to let you know that I do have some expectations for you all, some ground rules, some norms. If you've seen me before, you've seen these, because I always carry them with me. And they're not authored by me. They come to us from Glenn Singleton, but they are to stay engaged. There's so much going on in the world today. We are doing this virtually, so some of you might have all types of things going on your other tabs. Fight the temptation to go there. Stay right here with us, because it's going to be a powerful experience because each and every single one of you has permission to speak your truth with no shame, blame, or judgment. You can ask questions, you can disagree, you can push back. We're having a human journey, so I want you to show up as your authentic. That means your real and genuine self. Now, as a result of that, you also have to be prepared to experience discomfort, not because anything bad's going to happen. But if we're letting people speak their truths, and if we're committed to being lifelong learners, then we should expect at times to encounter ideas, value systems, perspectives, life journeys that challenge ours. They're different than ours. But when we hear them, it means that we're growing in robust ways. And certainly as educators, we need to always consider the fact that our work, it is a marathon, not a sprint. We frame it as a journey. We know that it's not about it being a one and done. So it is totally normal and okay if we leave a session or a learning experience with each other with more questions than we do answers. And in fact, I like adding that when we leave with more questions than answers, it's because we are steeped in the midst of the work. So with that, let's jump into what I have for us today. And we're going to start hot and heavy with some concept stabilization. And what I mean by that is being able to define the terms that we utilize before we engage in conversation on them to ensure that we're all on the same page. And what you see on the screen right now is what I mean when I talk about restorative practices. I'm talking about a framework, a range of approaches that aim to develop community. I got to say that first line again because I think somebody needs to hear it again. I'm talking about a framework and a range of approaches that aim to develop community. Then, to manage conflict and tension by restoring agency, repairing harm, and restoring relationships. Now, if we really dig into this, we have to acknowledge first and foremost, when we talk about restorative practices, it's a framework. A framework means that it's adaptive work. You know, that means that we're talking about mindsets. We're talking about beliefs. We're talking about value systems. If we're talking about this work, we have to have the willingness to go adaptive before we go technical or we miss it. Now, secondly, we're talking about a range of approaches, not just one practice. A range of approaches, a range of technical things we do because of the belief system that we have. This work is about mindsets. Then it's about a range of approaches that develops community. I start here because there's so many who assume that they're doing the work of restorative practice, but they think that it's really some mystical and magical procedures to manipulate young people into doing what we want when we have challenging circumstances with them, and that's not what the work is about. It is first and foremost about developing community, establishing trusting relationships, and as a result of developing those relationships, we borrow from that trust in moments of conflict and tension to be able to mitigate any harm that may have been done. Without the relationship, without the community, without the trust, we can't do the work. If there are kids who don't trust you, just because you say we're going to circle up and do restorative practice doesn't mean that they're going to magically and mystically trust you as soon as they hear that. Sometimes I share with colleagues, you got to conceptualize this like the proactive establishment of a trust bank account, where we make proactive deposits to establish trust in each other's lives with our kiddos and our colleagues, because we know as we go through these journeys with each other, there are going to be moments in time, both intentionally and unintentionally, where there are withdrawals that are made. And we want to be certain that we're in a circumstance where there is no human being that we're in community with that can ever say to this, hold up, wait a second, you need to stop. This transaction's not taking place because you don't have that currency with me. Your account with me is overdrawn. There's no overdraft coverage. And sorry, colleague, sorry, teacher person, but you're overdrawn and we're not going to be able to do this. See, the work, if we're authentic about it, is always about proactively developing relationships through listening to each other and hearing each other's voices. And that's where the work starts. Now, I want to also detangle something from you as we continue to move into this by lifting up just quickly. I'm not going to go deep down this rabbit hole, but I must make note of it. Restorative practice and restorative justice, two different things. They're related, but they're two different things. In this context, at least the way I'm framing it for you, restorative justice is a subset of restorative practice that has roots in the criminal justice system. It has roots in the work of the Truth and Reconciliation Council in apartheid South Africa, or as we were looking to make amends in that part of the world due to those heinous acts that took place. But as we talk about restorative practice in this context, we're actually talking about practices that originate from various indigenous cultures and communities around the world, including Native American, First Native peoples of Canada, African, Aborigine, and even the Maori of New Zealand. We're talking about ancient practices that have roots in indigenous cultures and communities across the globe, including neo-indigenous communities, grounded in the power of intentionally listening to each other and intentionally hearing each other, intentionally being sure that we are being seen and heard, and that those that are in community with us are having that experience as well. Now, something that is also dynamic about these practices are that they are rooted in a cultural schema of collectivism, which at times can be very different than the predominant cultural schema of individualism that often lives in our schoolhouses and classrooms. Now, this cultural schema of collectivism actually aligns with the cultural schema of many of your brown and black students and colleagues. This acknowledges the cultural schema that they exist in. And when we don't acknowledge that these different cultural schemas are in place in our school buildings and our classrooms, we sometimes are in silent conflict with how our students and some of our colleagues may exist and see themselves in the world. See, understanding this is essential to creating communities and cultures of belonging. And I actually learned that at a young age. I learned that when I was in the fourth grade, because school, for me, was one of the very first places in my life where it was ever communicated to me that I didn't belong. And that experience was devastating. And we'll get to that in a moment, but I know that I have just shared a lot with you. So I'm going to provide a quick micro moment, just 120 seconds, just 2 minutes to bring it back to you. I want to ensure that you can light up the chat box by sharing what your ahas, questions, wonderings, just what lives in your brain space after hearing me share about restorative practice in the way I have. And we're going to hear 2 minutes of an instrumental by the late, great rapper MF Doom to guide our reflections. Light up that chat box, speak your truth, feel free to push back, and here comes the song. Love how you all are speaking your truths. Love how you're lighting up the chat box. Love how you are approaching this with no shame, blame, or judgment. Love how you were seizing your agency and you're utilizing it. Look, this is not about ensuring that we're carbon copies of each other and we all see and think the same thing. No, we're human beings. So, of course, we have a variety of different entry points. Of course, it is important for us to be able to speak authentically from those places. Of course, it is important if we're truly trying to establish virtual community in that chat box, that it's important for us to be able to make spaces for different opinions and perspectives. And I love that that's manifesting right now. Now, as I mentioned before going into that micro moment of reflection, fourth grade, it's where I got a message from school that I didn't belong there. And I got that message in a couple of ways. First and foremost, I'm of Haitian American descent. And growing up, I had dynamic pride in what I thought was my culture, what I thought was my heritage, what I thought was my identity, pride in my family. You see me in an image on the screen. You can identify Mirko with that little red arrow pointing at me, surrounded by my cousins, just a snapshot of my extended family. But when I was in the fourth grade, I had well-intended teachers. I'm not saying that they were bad people. They may have just not been mindful of the impact of some things that they say, because I had to deal with them saying things like, Mirko, you don't look Haitian. You don't sound Haitian. You don't smell Haitian, and you don't talk like one of them. How could you be one of them? Now, well, I didn't know what they wanted a Haitian to look, dress, smell, sound like, or talk like. I got a crystal clear message that it wasn't okay being Haitian, at least not around them. It wasn't okay to carry that self with me, that part of myself with me to school. So I actually started concealing the element of my identity. I would just say that I was African American because I knew if I said that, I wouldn't have to deal with those challenging and weird, disrespectful questions. I also learned that I didn't belong because I would have questions that would bubble up in my mind about why we were doing the things that we were doing in school, how they connected to the world outside of school. And I learned quickly not to ask certain teachers those questions because they get disrespectful. They tell you to shut up. They tell you to put your head down. They would be infuriated if you asked or did anything that made them feel uncomfortable. And that sent me a crystal clear message that this place, it wasn't for me. It actually created a circumstance in my life where I completely disengaged from school. I was only there because I had to be legally. And I had every plan to drop out as soon as I was legally able to. And I was committed to blowing up classrooms, to blowing up assemblies, not because I wanted to be a bad kid, but for me, since I was forced to be at this place that I didn't belong in, I wanted to make sure that other kids in school with me knew that the teachers and the adults, that they were paid to say that they cared, but they weren't genuine. If we ask them challenging questions, we're going to get in trouble. Look at me. I will be the example for you. Don't trust these shady, lying adults. It actually created a circumstance where when you see the Mirko in this image, the 14-year-old me, I was in an abandoned house, abandoned building, one that had a fire in it in the community on a day in which I was skipping school. By that particular point in time in my life, I had been expelled from 3 schools already. By that particular point in time in my life, I had felony gun charges and every belief that I would not find my way until I was able to leave school. See, that was before I encountered a culture of belonging. And I do want to lift up in this moment that when kids aren't in school, that's data that something's driving them away. I'm not saying I know what that thing is, but it's data that there is something that is making them feel like it's not a place for them, that their needs aren't met, and that they have to go figure it out elsewhere. The confession that lived in my heart, the way I interpreted how teachers and adults saw me and what their expectations like for me were in the words of the poem that you see on the screen. You ain't nothing. Survival's a vicious game. Grab a tool, join the gang. Brown boy, you ain't nothing. In the hood, you'll remain consumed by the anger and pain till your blood's pouring out and on the concrete you lay slain. Cause brown boy, you ain't nothing. Join the team, whole heat, make a life in these streets as a predator. Super menace, your worth is worthless. Drop out. Life ain't for you. Drop out. This world hated you before you were born. Drop out, brown boy, you ain't nothing. You weed smoking shadow dweller, pariah of society. Be angry because we hate you. Fear us because we fear you. You'll never become anything because we don't want you to, and neither do you, brown boy, you ain't nothing. See, the message I received was I had nothing of value, nothing of worth, nothing that I could contribute to the space. So I certainly didn't feel like I belonged. And my voice was not valued there, was not seen or heard. Now, luckily, though, for Mirko, there was this awesome, unintended moment of intervention where I landed at a high school, just a regular public school, that actually had a strong culture of belonging. And their work, it's centered around these 4 tenets that you see on the screen. And it absolutely blew my mind and transformed who I was. They understood that all learners needed access to inclusive classrooms with grade level peers, not isolated, by the way. They understood that all learners needed equitable opportunities to learn alongside grade level standards. They had high expectations. They knew that all learners needed equitable expectations that they could be successful. They knew that all learners needed equitable feelings of both belonging and hope. And what's kind of funky about the bottom 2 bullets about expectations and feelings of belonging and hope, those have to be interpreted from the lenses of your learners, not from your lenses. If we interpret those from our lenses, we make assumptions. No matter how well intended those assumptions are, without the voices of our learners, they're just assumptions. See, we need mechanisms, systems, structures, tools that actually allow us to capture their voices so that it can inform the decisions that we make so that we can meet their needs. Why? Because school's not about you. It's about the kids. It's about the recipients of the instruction that you provide. You don't plan lessons. You don't plan interventions. You don't create the culture for you. You're not a student any longer. You're doing this for young people. So we need their voices to ensure that we're doing this in the right way. And, what I have on the screen right now, it's something that's become a little cliche in our work. Years ago, I used to get really excited about this notion of impact over intent, and I still do. But there's so many people, it's become so cliche that so many people say this without actually taking into consideration how challenging this concept is. There's so many people who say it, but the question for me is, do they really get that the work is about impact and not intent? Do they really understand how complex this notion is? And I raise it because if I'm transparent and honest with you, I had to learn the hard way that also, although I profess this, that I didn't actually get it, that I didn't actually understand it, that I had to be humbled by my kids, my students, my learners to really understand what this was about. See, even despite the fact that I was that turnaround kid, that kid that went to a place that was rooted in belonging that changed my life, a place that took me from entering with a 1.6 GPA to being a scholar with degrees from prestigious institutions, that took me from being an aspiring dropout to having a successful 20-year career in the field as a school leader, being a founding head of a thriving school community. See, when I initially had my opportunity to try to create a culture of belonging, I fumbled the bag. I messed it up. I could not do it in the right way. And it took kids calling me out to see that. See, when I had the opportunity to launch my school community in the year 2012, I thought that I did all the right things. I got to hire people who look like the kids. Back in those days, the work revolved around the notion of social justice. So we professed it in our culture and value system. We talked about how we believed in kids. We believed that we were going out of our way to meet the needs of kids. Yet at the same time, our school was in crisis. That's what community members would say. That's what school board members would say. That's what the district would say. Because despite our intentions, despite us following supposedly the map of what was necessary to do to create a space that allowed young people to feel valued, the teachers were at odds with the kids all the time. The kids were at odds with the teachers all the time. And I, as a young brown man, as an administrator, found myself in a circumstance where I was in a hot seat. I came in with these aspirations to do some great work because I had a turnaround story. So I knew what kids went through. Yet I was still at the midst of a typical circumstance where I had a bunch of adults, including myself, who thought we knew what was going on, and a bunch of kids who were showing us that we didn't know anything. See, in a move of desperation, what I did was survey the kids and the staff. Same questions. To try to figure out, is there something that we're not getting? How do we make this work? There was one question about belonging that changed everything for us. And it was a question that asked the students, do you believe that you are well known, treated with respect and dignity in this place? Well, the long and short of it is overwhelmingly, over 80% of the staff responded, yes, of course. We love them. We trust them. We're here from them. Flip side, overwhelmingly, over 80% of the kids said, we hate it here. You don't know us. You all are fake. That data was like a gut punch. It hurt to hear. It hurt to look at. It hurt because how could it possibly be true? We were doing all the right things. We believed in kids. We were doing this work for them. How could it possibly be true? Well, when we sat with it, when we wrestled with it, when we got over being dysregulated as adults, when we got over shaming and blaming kids and saying things like, they're lying, they're just trying to get a rise out of us, they're just trying to get us upset. When we got over it, we had to sit with the fact. I had to sit with the fact that despite all the things we said, despite all the things we had on the walls, we did not actually believe in the value of student voice. We had no evidence that we believed it. We had no systems, no structures that we believed it. We had no mechanisms. We had no frameworks. And we honestly didn't even know that we needed them. We thought all we needed to do was say, hey, we care. We're going to be better than everybody else. We're going to be here for you. We didn't actually know that we needed the voices of our young people to do that work in powerful ways. And it wasn't until that was exposed that we realized we had to do something different. The slide that you see on the screen is actually a snapshot of some of our discipline data. And you can see in those first couple of years, we were a small school. Those number of suspensions were high. After we went through this survey and this first experience of wrestling with what it means to respond to the power of the voices of our young people, we learned that we needed systems, structures, mechanisms. We took a deep dive into making sense of restorative practices. And you can see on the screen that it changed our data dynamically. Once we actually had systems and structures in place to capture the voices of our young people, once it wasn't just about our intentions, but there were actually mechanisms in place to give power back. And that's when we started wrestling with the equation that you see on the screen, that your values plus your practices equal your outcomes. And if your outcomes do not represent the full magnitude of the potential of your community, then it's a direct indictment that your values may be off. They may not be the right values. There may be some significant adaptive work that needs to be done. Or you may be operating with the wrong practices that are necessary to bring about the results that you were looking for. I've said a lot. It's not just about me. It's a shared experience, so I'm bringing it back to you. Questions, thoughts, reactions, wonderings, ahas. Light up the chat box. No shame, blame, or judgment. Speak your truths. The song for this one is going to be No More Rain by Angie Stone. Wow, you all are impressing me by being so authentic, being so vulnerable, speaking your truths. I'm calling this out because for me, that's what it means to show up as your authentic self. That's what it means for me to show up in the midst of your humanity. And when we give ourselves permission, I'll say that again. When we give ourselves permission to unmask and show up in educational spaces as our authentic selves, we provide opportunities for genuine connections to take place. See, it requires courage to be real, especially with the kiddos. And when we do that, they respond in positive ways. Now, back to our regularly scheduled program. In the absence of their voices, a question directly to you. How do we know if learners actually see themselves reflected in our work? And I raise this question in a rhetorical way, because for me, the direct response to that is we won't. How will we know if they get that this work is for them, that we're doing this for them? They won't. See, it's not about our intent or our assumptions about what they are capable of. John Hattie's work addresses that. See, this is about the impact of our work and because of our work as experienced by our learners. Again, the direct recipients of the instruction, of the planning, of the work that we do. We provide it, we prepare it for them. They're the ones who receive it. We need to understand what it is like for them to be on the receiving end of it, so we can ensure that we fine tune. So we can ensure that what they experience matches what our intentions are. And that it's not an experience like mine, at least when I began at school, where we thought we were doing the right thing, but we were really just patting ourselves on the back and not acknowledging that the young people needed power. Now, I know that there are UDLers that are on this call. I'm not about to make this a UDL presentation, but I am going to say that the explicit stated goal of UDL is the development of learner agency. That means the development of learner voice. How are you going to do that if you don't have systems and structures, mechanisms in place that make it okay for your learners to actually share their voices? Not just when the teacher says it's okay, but that it's normal for them to actually operate with a sense of agency. Restorative practices provide us with tools that enact this work, that make it real, that make it more than aspirational, because there's actually mechanisms to ensure that the individuals that the work is for can develop their voices uninterrupted by the educators that sometimes might miss it. And me saying educators might miss it's not knocking educators. I've been in this game for almost 30 years of my life. There's power in being an educator, but that doesn't mean that we are perfect and that we get it right all the time. See, we need to acknowledge that so that our egos get out of the way and we can truly center on the kids. And for me, this is what the real work of equity is. And I'm not going political because this is not about politics. It's about kids and concept stabilization. There's a definition that I'm showing you on the screen. This is what I mean when I say equity. It comes to us directly from Dr. Christopher Emdin, not Facebook, not Instagram, not TikTok, but from the researcher, Dr. Christopher Emdin. And that definition is hearing somebody's voice and what they need and providing them with that. Again, it's something that sounds poetic. It's something that sounds powerful. But I'm telling you, without intentional systems and structures that we've designed into our practice, it's challenging to make this a reality. Now, $50 million question for you all. No shame, blame, or judgment. We're just speaking our truths here. We're human beings. We're educators that are in the midst of an adult learning community that are pushing and pulling on each other so we can get better. But the question is, how do you currently gather, support, and honor student voice and or each other's voices? And I add that piece because sometimes we realize in spaces in which we don't have structures that allow us to gather and honor the voices of young people, those are typically spaces where we don't have structures that authentically allow us to gather and honor the voices of our colleagues in safe ways. I might have just dropped the bomb in the room, but it's all good. No shame, blame, or judgment. The song for this one is So a Child May Follow by Damian Molly. Light the chat box up, speak your truth. Again, continue to speak your truths in the chat box. I always have to remind folks that part of what gives us as educators the power to wrestle with what it means to create circumstances that are truly student-centered are rooted in us first and foremost being committed to creating adult learning communities, creating spaces in which we can be vulnerable with one another, creating spaces in which we can push and pull on each other, increase our capacity so we can be better when we stand before those kiddos. And I love the fact that you were doing that in the chat box right now. I have to call it out. I have to lift it up because some of you might not realize that that's a big part of the experience and we need to name it so that you're aware of it and you can carry this with you as we continue moving forward. Now, when we think about this work, at least part of what lights me up about it is when we institute restorative practices in the most robust way, when we commit to developing a community that is saturated in restorative work and practices, we support the development of a culture of belonging by minimizing threats and distractions. We make it a safe space because it has to be a safe space if individuals are going to take the chance at sharing their voices. We don't do that in spaces that we do not think we are safe in. We do this by fostering a sense of community and collaboration, developing facilitation skills and coping skills and strategies, developing regular engagement and self-assessment and the metacognitive ability to wrestle with what I look and sound like to other people, that there might be things playing in my head, in my actions in this moment, they might not add up. I might have unintentionally said or did something in my brain. I thought it went this way, but for the people in this classroom with me, oh shoot, I did something. I'm learning how to develop that skill set when I'm in a community that's rich with these practices. And certainly, they support planning and the development of strategic development and planning, rather. Now, I keep on saying that they're practices, that it's plural, and I'm going to quickly walk you through what I mean with that. There's a continuum to these practices. It's not a circumstance where there's a one-size-fits-all. This is important, folks, because there are many people who get this work wrong, not just by thinking that it starts with discipline, not just because they don't realize that it's about proactively developing trust that we borrow from to ensure that we can be on the same page and to ensure that in moments of challenge, because we have that trust, that we can actually institute healing. Some folks assume that it's just about one practice, and that's not the case. And we need to understand that the practices that are part of this continuum, they're tools that we need to practice and develop expertise in order to utilize them skillfully and effectively. and deploy them skillfully and effectively. And something I want to lift up as well is some of us, some of you may already be steeped in doing some of this work, although you haven't had the verbiage to call out that you're engaged in it. See, this continuum, it starts with affective statements, I statements, owning what you say. No longer addressing young people and saying, hey, we in the school community are disappointed in you. All of us think it was crazy that you did this. How could you have done this? You disappointed all of us. It's owning your statements. I, Mr. Chardin, Jamal, man, I can't believe you said that today. That disappointed me. I have higher expectations of you than that. Or, hey, Susie, I am proud. You were just killing it. What's the power in owning those statements and making them I statements? Well, they open us up to the possibility of vulnerability. They open us up to the possibility that we might be wrong. They open us up when we own them to the possibility that once more data is shared, once a different perspective is shared, that we might have to pull them back. You can't do that when you say you're speaking for everybody and you're speaking for the community. You're a human being. If you're establishing relationships with kids, have the courage to own what you say. The use of affective questions. That's simply what I want you to keep in your brain space is that's about not asking yes or no or leading questions. That's about utilizing questions that are invitational, questions that allow other individuals to actually share what's in their heart. How do you feel about that? Why was this important to you? Is this something that you value? How would you feel if I told you that you might actually be incorrect? See, if it's invitational, there's an opportunity for us to give agency to the individual who then can respond in a genuine way. If it's a leading question or a yes or no question, we've essentially provided them with the framework that says, you're going on a ride and I'm taking you somewhere. If you have different perspectives, different data to share, there's no room for it. Engaging in impromptu conferences. What I mean by that, circumstances, you're leaving a PD session, a faculty session. It seems like a couple of your colleagues are getting on each other's nerves. You jump in the mix. Hey, what's going on? You guys okay? No, you do this with young people. That impromptu ability to recognize that there might be a moment of tension that's brewing, so you step into it. Impromptu. That's some of the restorative work. You can only do that effectively if you actually have relationships with folks. Now, certainly there are formal structures, group structures, like circle practice. When I say circle practice, we must, though, untangle the fact that there are different layers to that. Circle practice is not just one thing. There's also group practices, like the usage of story of self, usage of story of us and now, the usage of personal narratives, maybe the usage of cogenerative dialogues or groups to be able to deal with the circumstance. And certainly, on the formal end of the spectrum, formal conferences, healing circles, or maybe mediations. We must understand, again, that it's not a one-size-fits-all approach. It's a framework with a range of practices. We develop expertise so we can deploy the practices effectively, if we're doing this work the right way. And now, a snapshot of a whole school model of this work. And typically in education, we love thinking about our stacked tiered models. So it's on your screen that way. And notice when we think about tier one as it pertains to this work, it's about community building. That's what's for everybody. Developing the social emotional skills through community building, establishing that trust. When we get to tier two, maybe we're talking about some problem solving circles. Maybe we're talking about some cogenerative groups or dialogues to help mitigate some problem solving around classroom issues. And when we get to tier three, we're talking about some intensive supports. Maybe we're talking about some restorative conferences. Maybe at that point in time, we're talking about rebuilding relationships that have been broken down. We got to restore the harm that's occurred. That's only for 1.5% of the population. That's not for everybody. That's not for every day. Many of us, when we think about this work, think the tier three approach is the approach that everybody should get. And that's where it falls apart. We got to understand, again, that this is about building community and trust, normalizing that it's okay for your young people to say things. So they know in those moments of tension that if they say things, it's still going to be okay because it's always been okay for them to speak to you. And it's not a setup. You're not an adult who's going to trick them, manipulate them into trying to be honest with you and then penalizing them because they thought that they could trust you. Now, pushing you a little bit, we're going to have a mini pop quiz. I'm going to put 5 statements on the screen. No shame, no blame, no judgment. I just want to see what's in your brain spaces right now. I'm going to play a song. Music's an important part of the work, or at least my work. And while I play that song, light up the chat box. Let me know what you think. Which of the practices that you see on the screen, those 5 bullets, which of them could be considered a form of restorative practice? Could any of them be considered a form of restorative practice? Can all of them be considered a form of restorative practice? Speak your truths, use your voice. The song we're going to hear next is Full for You by CeeLo Green. Enjoy the music, light up the chat box. Woo, yeah, I agree with y'all. I know I put together the playlist, but I'm feeling it. And there's something magical about being able to vibe with that energy and sharing it with you all and being able to receive that energy back via the chat. See, there's something dynamic going on. We're talking about what it means to restore agency. That's the thing that's restored. And you all speaking your truths in the chat, even though I'm not hearing you, even though I'm not hearing your voices, reading your energy and seeing your agency there, it fills me with energy. Now, back to our regular scheduled program. It was a trick question. All of these things could be considered as forms of restorative practice. Remember, when we talk about restorative practice, the key thing we're talking about restoring is agency, voice. We're talking about systems, structures, mechanisms that intentionally provide colleagues with voice, that intentionally provide young people with voice. I keep saying colleagues, throwing that in the mix, because if some of you know me or seen me before, you know that I believe in this work, again, not as manipulative things that we do with young people, but as real work. As work that applies to all human beings. See, part of the power of developing a culture that is rich in restorative practices is we help to restore each other's agency, not just that of the young people. And by restoring each other's agency, we get to model for the young people what it's like to wrestle with the dynamics of being in spaces where voices are actually seen and heard, and where we treat each other with respect and dignity as we honor each other's varied perspectives. Now, I'm gonna push us a little bit, and maybe as I push us, with this next slide, I get that I'm probably revealing my age and my generation, because I know a lot of people in the world of today don't talk about Maslow's hierarchy, but I am, and I'm gonna connect Maslow's hierarchy to Bloom's taxonomy, and I'm gonna say explicitly that we need Maslow before Bloom if we're going to authentically get the brain ready to learn. And this is all connected to this work. And now I know some people don't like Maslow's hierarchy because at the top of the hierarchy where they see self-actualization, they think that sounds hoity-toity and it's so out of reach. Well, in this context, I'm talking about getting the brain ready for an instructional experience. And I'm going to try to quickly break this down through the lenses of Mirko. And I hope this is not too much TMI, but it's a moment of vulnerability for you all, or me modeling a moment of vulnerability for you all. And when I think about times in my life as a kid and as a grown man right now, when my physiological needs aren't met, I'm dehydrated, I'm super hungry, I'm hangry, and I'm in a professional development session that's early in the morning. When I'm hangry and dehydrated, I can't remember, I can't understand, I can't apply. I'm trying to make sense of what's going on, but I'm just hungry. Can we have a break so I can go get something to eat? Why do we have to start so early? How come they had these PDs with no food? Maybe some of y'all can relate. When now, as a grown man that has a great deal of power and authority, not even as a vulnerable child, when I'm in a space and I don't feel safe, I have a hard time recalling, remembering, understanding. I just want to make sure I'm safe. Why are they looking at me like that? Do I got to be on guard? Is something going to happen? I can't apply. I can't analyze. I can't evaluate. I can't create. I'm trying to be safe. If I'm in a space where I don't feel like I belong, I came in for the meeting today, I sat down, people started grabbing their stuff like I was going to touch their stuff. I'm feeling disrespected. I don't feel like I belong in this space. I don't have the ability to remember that great information that I was trying to connect with, to understand what's going on. I'm hot. I'm in this place mad because I feel disrespected by the folks that are in here. See, when we don't address Maslow's, and I'm trying to make this as real as possible, we make it almost impossible for our kids to show up and connect and access their neocortexes, access the parts of their brain where they do all their thinking, learning, and connecting. We have to take this into consideration. And if any of you can relate to some of the things that I just said, if any of you can relate to what it feels like to be thirsty or hangry or unsafe or not feeling like you belong in a space and how that makes it so it's challenging to engage in this space, you with degrees and a career and the expertise that you have, if that is hard for you, then how much harder is it going to be for a kid who hasn't gotten to that place of maturity that you're at yet? Just something to think about. See, we have to ensure through providing voice and having these mechanisms that provide voice that we are creating culture that's rich in the conditions of nurture. Those conditions are simple. They're safety, inclusion, and collaboration. But again, if we're taking into consideration that it's not what we think about those things, but what our audience's experience as it pertains to those things, then it shifts things a little bit. Because if our learners are actually safe, then they don't filter themselves. They just talk. If they're silent in your classroom, it might be because the fear is, I don't know what's going on. I don't want to say the wrong thing. I'm not going to embarrass myself. I'm going to just keep my head down, my eyes down. Please don't call on me. It is not safe for me to take a chance. If you've ever been in a faculty meeting or PD where the adults are quiet and it's pin drop silence, that might be going on too. Please don't let this facilitator call on me. Please don't anybody ask me what's going on. I don't know what's going on right now, and I don't agree with this. They don't want my opinion. If I say what I got to say, I might get in trouble. When we think about this piece of inclusion, I'm not just talking about your intent, but from the perspectives of the learners. This is where inclusion goes from inclusion to inclusive practices. Do the learners, the people that this is for, do they feel like the experience is for them? Do they feel like it's been intentionally designed, planned, created for them? If not, it's not inclusive. Sorry, not sorry. It's an attempt, but if they don't feel it, it's not real. That doesn't mean that you're a failure if you tried something and the rain hasn't hit the ground yet. It just means you got to go back to the drawing board. Remember to expect and accept non-closure. It's a marathon, not a sprint. If you tried it and it didn't work because the kids didn't feel it, try again, because if they don't feel it, it's not real. Collaboration is the same thing. It's not just because you put protocols together, but do they actually believe that they're going to be successful when they work with each other because they can trust you to keep them safe? If they can't trust you to keep them safe, why am I even going to take a chance working with these other kids? They might start talking about my mama again. And the last time they did that, you had nothing to say. I told you that my mama is sick. I told you how much that makes me dysregulated, but you ain't do nothing. So no, I'm not working in your group today. That might have touched something for somebody. We just keeping it real in here. I'm just pushing you so we can think and try to do better for those that we serve. Bringing it back to you because you know Mirko gets all crazy and passionate up in here. So question for you in this moment. What do your students need to feel safe and included? And bonus points if you talk about what you need to feel safe and included. Song for this one is Listen by Beyonce. Continue to light up the chat. Continue to speak your truths. Man, y'all are amazing. I love the fact, again, that you are speaking your truths, that you are lighting up the chat box in such a dynamic way. And, you know, I must confess, sometimes Mirko talk too much. Sometimes that passion takes over and time isn't always my friend. So I had a lot of extra stuff to say, but this is not just about me talking at you. You know, we're talking about providing individuals with agency. So I want to make sure that there are opportunities to invite as many of your voices as possible in being able to lift up things that you need to lift up. And we're going to do this in two ways. One, I'm going to put an optimistic closure activity on the screen. Does not mean that the session is ending by any way, shape, or form. But I do want you to reflect, to sit in a moment of reflection on some of the content that you've heard thus far. And then after this optimistic closure reflection, we're going to do some Q&A. You know, there's going to be an opportunity for some of you to share some questions, and I will do my best with no shame, blame, or judgment to try to address them. But as we move into this reflective activity, what I want you to do is to identify a heart, club, diamond, or spade, just as you reflect on this experience. You know, something from the heart, something new that grew, a new idea, a gem that you might hold on to forever, or maybe something that you want to dig into a little bit more. We're going to bring it right back to Beyonce. We're going to play 120 seconds, 2 minutes of her song, Halo, while you do this, and then we're going to pivot to hearing your voices and seeing what some of your dynamic questions are. Enjoy this next micro moment of reflection. And here comes Halo by Beyonce. Ooh, I love that song. But we want to hear from you all.
Hey, well, thank you so much for that amazing presentation and also the playlist. You had me crying, you had me singing, and so all the things were happening as my camera was off, but lots of great information to just for me to reflect on, for our audience to reflect on and bring it back to their schools and their teams. But we have a couple of questions from the audience. The first question that came in, was there anything surprising that you found when asking students what they need to feel like they belong and to have hope?
It's a very good question. And yes, there was a lot that was surprising. There were surprising things that blew me away as a kid who went through a turnaround experience. Uh, but hearing from kids who I had assumed didn't value school or education, even though shame on me, I shouldn't have operated with those lenses because I know what it felt like to have adults do that. But kids who seemed like they were completely disengaged, making it clear that they're aware of everything that was going on, that they were making conscious decisions about when they chose to do work and when they didn't choose to do work based on how they were valued. And that blew me away because it helped me understand that even though they may be operating with what I assume is a different level of maturity, it doesn't mean that they're not highly analytical. It doesn't mean that they're not very smart. It doesn't mean that they don't understand what's going on.
That's wonderful. Thank you for addressing that question. We had a couple come up within some of the music breaks that came in. One in particular, they were very interested in the data that you shared with us. And so, how did you process that data with your staff? And what was the first change that you put in place based on what you were seeing in the data?
So we processed the data with a consultant. I knew when I saw it that in order for me to be a participant, and I needed to be a participant, this wasn't about me shaming or blaming the staff because the data was about me too. That we
Mhm.
needed to have an unbiased opinion that was in the room, and since it was data, that we needed to sit with it and not reject it, because the initial reaction was the kids weren't honest. This is not real. We can't take this seriously. Let's look at high stakes testing data. Why are we looking at this? Let's move away from it. We had to wrestle with adult uncomfortability and sit there.
Mhm.
And we had to wrestle with making sense of, how it could be that the kids had such a different perspective than us. Then we had to wrestle with what it would take for
Mhm.
us, not even the kids, but for us to feel safe enough having conversations with kids about this, where we didn't get upset, where we didn't get
Mhm.
angry at the things that they said. And that took a long time. It took a long time for us as adults to get ready so we could sit with the kids and try to make sense of how we had made such big mistakes.
Right, right. When you say a long time, how much time did you give, did people feel like they needed it before they had these honest conversations?
So we essentially we got the data. It was probably in the spring of that school year,
Hmm.
and we sat with it until we got to the summer. We created a bunch of committees and groups that would explicitly dig into certain elements of the data. We essentially tried to approach it. Using a jigsaw method. We were going to own different elements. We were going to do some digging, and we were going to share with the adults. We were going to make it into an action research project so it can
Mm.
inform some of the planning we would do over the summer to try to make some different decisions when we start the next school year.
I love that. I love that you gave time because this is not something that you can just utilize and then take action with overnight. It's something that you needed time to sit with. You brought in an outside consultant to help sift through the information so you can be a participant than someone that's really just like sifting through the data. So I love how you just captured that whole process for our audience and also just for me and reflecting about how if I had the opportunity, what would I do differently? And some of what you're mentioning is things that I would do with my staff to really reflect and add student voice to really have impact in what we're doing day to day for them, not to them. And so thanks for highlighting that. Are there any specific strategies that you will say are some go-tos that you could recommend to the audience to build relationships, authentic relationships with students that may be seen as a challenge, quote unquote?
Absolutely. And I say this with a smile because some may not expect me to say this, but it's starting with the adults first. When
Mm,
we dug into restorative practice, we didn't roll out with kids right away. We did it amongst ourselves. We needed to understand what it meant to
mm,
actually talk and listen, work on self regulation, and to wrestle with what the power of the practices were genuinely for us. We
mm.
had to acknowledge that there was some drama, that drama that nobody likes talking about, but everybody knows exists in the teacher's room, in the
Mhm,
faculty lounge. If we
mhm.
couldn't deal with that, we weren't ready to bring it to kids. So we started by healing the adult culture. And then it was game time with the kiddos.
Yes, I am a full believer in that. We have to model, we have to practice what we preach. We can't ask students to do things that we haven't done as adults. And so I truly believe that. And so I'm glad that you all poured into your educators so then they can pour into students. And they're modeling things that they have been trying themselves too. And so I love that you guys did that. I think we have a little bit of time for a couple of questions, and I'm just pulling other things that came up. Let's see, how can we implement this? When we talk about restorative practices, how do we implement this? There was a question around preschool specifically. Because when we think about restorative practices, it's mostly we think about elementary and
Mhm.
above. But when we're talking about preschool, is there any guidance you have for our audience around that?
Absolutely. And I say this with a smile as well, because I got a toddler at home and she teaches me a lot every day, blows my mind. And I would say this to people all the time before I had a toddler, and she's made it so real for me. Now, there are things that she can't say, there are things that she can't communicate. But something that she is always able to let me and her mother know clearly are the things that she does not like, are the things that are not working for her. And one of the first words that she has learned is no. And while that might not seem like it's everything, making it normal for our kiddos to share with us what's not working for them and modeling that when they share that feedback, when it's appropriate, that we'll try something different is the beginning of this work because we're making it okay for them to share that critical feedback with us. And we're making it okay for them to understand that if they share that something that an adult's doing is not working for them, that the adults aren't going to get mad and they'll take it into consideration.
Thank you. Thank you for highlighting that. We have another question come up in the Q&A. Where do you start with teachers who believe students should respect them? Um, it's not a room with a give and take, but rather a room where teachers teach and children are expected to learn.
Oh, that's a toughie. Since we have short time, I will just go with we have to start the practices with the adults. We have to ensure before we start moving to shame and blame, critical feedback on each other's practice, that there's safe spaces for us to have those conversations. In
Mm,
fact, I typically say to folks, a lot of professional development efforts fall apart because there's not a culture of trust amongst the adults in which critical feedback can be provided. And what I mean by that is it's not okay for someone to say they have questions about what's happening in your classroom without you taking it personal. If we can't have critical conversations about the work without taking it personal, then we're not at the space of actually being able to dig in to what it
mm,
means to get better. So I would start the practices with adults. Ensure
mhm.
that that person that you want to have conversations with feels safe being seen and heard, and then leverage the trust to have some challenging conversations about what you think should be happening in the classroom.
I love this. Thank you so much. What a way to just wrap up this amazing presentation with this wonderful Q&A. Thank you for lifting up things like having courageous conversation, leaning into what does it mean to be in a safe space for an adult, because that looks different for the individual. Thank you for highlighting these things for us. And so as we wrap up, I just want to say, first of all, thank you, Mirko, for sharing, just kicking off day two in such an inspiring, such an innovative, such a a wonderful and amazing way. I want to thank my internal team, VFAIR's team, our ASL interpreters, our Spanish interpreters, just to make this come to life today. Next on the schedule, we have a short break. And you will have the opportunity to enjoy some poetry reading recorded by one of our student panelists, Helena Donato Sapp, before you head into your first breakout session at 10:30. During lunch, make sure you bring your food and join us for our special feature, Behind the Music with Teresa Burnett, aka DJ B Diamond. So stay tuned for that. And also enjoy today's breakouts and stop by the exhibit hall when you get a chance to just explore some resources from across the statewide system of support. You can access even more resources from our partners across the state and beyond by clicking the More Resources tab in the taskbar at the top of your screen. And so with that said, we are going to close out this session, and please head over to enjoy some poetry reading, and I will see some of you in our next session at our first breakout session at 10:30. Thank you all for joining, for kicking off day 2 with us, and enjoy the rest of the conference. You're in for a treat, y'all.